Welcome to episode 109 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's one and only open source film and digital photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we're back with another show for you all. In the last show, we had a very lively discussion about twin lens reflexes. We started off with some history and then went straight into some heavy gas, covering medium format 6x6 TLRs, 35mm TLRs, and even some sub-miniature TLRs. We were joined by Sarah Davis, who has extensive experience repairing Yashica and Rolleiflex TLRs, and we covered a whole host of other topics. For episode 109, we are revisiting a topic we last covered all the way back in episode 18. On that show, we were graced with Canon historian and author Peter Kitchingman. And what do you know? He's back. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Hi, how are you?
Joining Peter and the regular Camerosity hosts is a room full of eager listeners. So let's just get started and let everyone in. All right. We'll go through the list as usual. We have a lot of returning callers, some familiar faces, a couple I don't recognize. So Will Pinkham, hey, William. Smith is here. Jeremy Scott's back. John Roberts, haven't seen you in a little while. Ben Ryerson's here again. Hey, Ben. Joan, I don't recognize Joan. You want to say hello?
Hi, Joan.
She's waving enthusiastically, but...
There we go. Sorry. Yes, we met many years ago up at the Cincinnati Photoshop show.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, I remember you. And then Greg Harp. Hey, Greg.
How are you?
So we have Peter Kitchingman here. Peter, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself real quick, kind of give a quick origin story about how you came known as the Canon Rangefinder guy, and maybe talk a little bit about your book or so.
Oh, God, that's nearly 20 years old, that book. Can't believe it. So, but no, I'm still pottering around with Canons, and I'm looking at my display case up here on my left, which is all my cameras. They're on display, not in cardboard boxes under the bed. So, but other than that, no, I spend a lot of time on the Canon Historical Society. So there's a lot of new people coming on there, which is great. And a lot of young people taking up cameras now, film cameras especially. So that's a real bonus, I reckon. But other than that, I'm just still getting older.
Yeah, your book, I mean, I have a copy of it. I bought it straight from you. I know it can be found other ways too, but it's nice to be able to have bought it directly from you. But one thing that's great about your book, it's pretty much covers the lenses, but it's laid out so well. I mean, it's got one of the nicest, everything is logically organized. You have a lot of examples of the different lenses, what's different about them. It is truly a Bible, so to speak, for the Canon rangefinder system, and definitely one that I recommend. The original Canon rangefinder Bible was Peter Deckert's book, which is still very good, and it's one that I reference frequently, but it's much smaller than yours, and it really doesn't cover a lot of the accessories or show all the different variations. So it's nice for someone who's really into this system to really have both books. And even though Peter Deckert's book has been out of print for a long time, it's not impossible to find like some other rare book. But do you still have new copies, Peter, of yours that people can buy new from you?
I still have about 200 left.
Okay, that's plenty then.
1,000, because I'm the only one that's selling them. I wish I'd actually done the book in a smaller format, because the cost of postage nowadays is just prohibitive.
Yeah, it's physically a large book. I will give you that, but the layout's so nice.
I laid that out mainly because, I gave it to a young chap who was first done a graphic design thing, and he did a really good job on it. But basically, I wanted something where anybody with any language could pick it up and get something visually from it, rather than because you can pick up some like Hayato's books, which is all in Japanese, and you're lost. But I try to make it out so everybody could sort of read it some sort of way.
We'll post your email address on the show notes, so anyone who is interested can contact you to get one.
Oh yeah, no trouble at all. It's just that postage now to the States is around about $88 Australian. So
it's worth it. I'll reach out to you. I didn't realize you had more fresh copies. I've worn mine out, and you can see I've got tabs for all of the different lenses, so I can go straight to the pages.
By any chance, Peter, are you planning another trip to Sydney at some point? Because I might actually get you to spring one up with you to save the postage.
Yeah, well, the postage in Australia is not too bad. It's about 20 bucks or something like that. So that's not too bad.
I might just do that anyway.
How far away are you and Theo from each other?
I think you're in Melbourne, aren't you, Peter?
About 800 clicks, I think. You're in Sydney, aren't you, Theo?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I think we organised to try and meet up. I think it was a couple of years ago, and never quite sort of pulled it off. So
Yeah. You're down in on Botany Bay, aren't you?
yes, I am.
Yeah, I thought so.
Well, it was interesting that this was the topic for tonight because earlier today, young guy from Manchester, UK, posted a picture of a camera that he had inherited from his uncle and had asked a question about it, if anyone knew what he had. It turns out it was a J2 with the 50 millimeter collapsible Nikkor. And I was researching in Deckert's. I digitized Peter's notes on when he was trying to come up with the numbering system for the cameras, and found that it was that there were actually two versions of the J2. One version that had a cover plate over the slow speed dial, and a second version that they just covered over with covering. So they took off the cover plate. And what this guy had was the first version. It was serial number 8282, which was interesting. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong here. The J was started in around 1939. Well, they stopped production of the camera, and then they didn't restart it until 45 or 46.
45.
Okay, and they used the parts from the J, which is why I guess they just put the cover plate on the J2, the early version of it.
They used the parts from the S to make the J2.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's about 30 cameras used the model, the top plate of the S, because the actual engraving is across the top, not underneath the word Canon. Most of them you'll find has got the company name under the name Canon, whereas the early ones, I think there's about 30, I've got to have the name across the top. They're the rare ones.
What would that have been? What would that have been, the 39 versions, or would that have been the post-war versions?
The writings across the top on the first, about 30 J2s.
I don't know if I can hold it up here. An S, there's an S,
That's
and it
an
has
S,
the writing across the top
like that. Without the pop-up viewfinder.
The other thing you notice, it does have the pop-up, but it has the viewfinder or the rangefinder window here. Well, the J, since they dispense with it, so here's my J2.
Yes. Yeah.
So my J2 is one of the later ones with the serial number. I can't get it to focus, but the serial number underneath. Yeah. But notice the other thing is interesting is the top has been modified. It's hard to tell, but you can see a dovetail here where they actually modified the top. And mine just happened to pick up some dirt that highlights the dovetail, which makes it interesting to see.
All the J2s I've seen so far seem to have that little mark on the superstructure. I don't know why.
They're strange. I assume it's because they were modifying it to close that hole.
Possibly, yeah. I've never pulled it apart to have a look. Yeah.
Greg, can you describe what a J looks like? Because there's something very different about that camera that's different from all the other Canon cameras.
Well, this is a J2. I don't have a J, unfortunately, yet in my collection. It's the only pre-war model I don't have. Well, no, there are some others. But a J, the difference between is they had the Canon original, right? And mine is a little bit rough. And it's a rangefinder camera with the surprise viewfinder, right? The pop-up viewfinder. And of course, it has the lens mount that Nippon Kagaku made for Canon to get around the Leica patents. But then they wanted to make and they made the Model J, which had the J mount, which somehow they decided didn't infringe the patents. And then post-war, they had leftover S parts. They made the J2 out of S parts with the J mount lenses, with the screw mount lenses. But these have a viewfinder only, no rangefinder.
Yes, right. That's what I was getting.
And that's why you have that. We believe that's why you have this dovetail here, because they've modified the top where it had a hole for a rangefinder, and they had to replace that metal or splice that metal. At least that's the working theory.
So you touched upon something that I think is interesting, and in Canon diehards will already know this, but to someone who maybe is a little new to these cameras, it's pretty easy to say that the Canon early rangefinders were Leica copies, right? They usually get grouped in with that, generic system of 35 millimeter rangefinder cameras, but there's a lot of differences, and there's a reason why the Canon started out quite a bit different. When you look at the very first model, you'll notice that the body of the camera, it doesn't have the rounded edges like a typical Leica does. It's a little more angled. Yeah. So he's holding it up there. We'll have a picture of this. You see that large knob.
So the winding is still has a wind knob on the top. This is just a frame counter.
It's probably the largest exposure counter I've ever seen on a camera. It's on the front phase.
And then this is the focus.
The mount was made by Nippon Kugaku, which became Nikon. They made the mount, they made the lenses, and they made the rangefinder assembly. So pretty much any of the optical parts of that camera was made by Nippon Kugaku they weren't called Canon then, they were Seiki Kugaku. And if you really just look at that camera, it doesn't look much like a Leica at all. In fact, they kind of started off not being very Leica at all. And then after the war, they did. And the biggest reason for that is that in Germany, Leitz had patents on the Leica's design. The Leica thread mount, the actual diameter and thread pitch and rangefinder coupling, that was all patented. And in Japan, the Japanese companies wanted to honor that. We all know the story of the Soviet Feds and Zorkis, which just said, screw patents, we're just going to copy whatever the hell we want. So the pre-war Fed rangefinders used the Leica thread mount illegally. Like they didn't have the rights to do that. But after the war, as reparations or punishment, what have you, to Germany, pretty much any pre-war German patent was nullified after the war. So anything that any of the companies made that somebody wanted to copy was open season. And that's why you'd started to see the Nikkas, the Leo taxes, the Tanax, and some of the less common ones. Chio tax, Melcon is one that we recently discussed on Discord ever so briefly. And then even Canon decided to go back to the true Leica thread mount. But they didn't start out that way. They had this really complicated mount, which is very similar to the Contax mount. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. And although he's not here tonight, Bob Rodoloni has shared many times how that lens mount was diabolical to me. For people who love serial numbers, when you look at those old Canon rangefinders, the Canon body has a serial number, but so does the mount. Usually they're on the bottom. I think it might have moved. Do you have a serial number on the bottom of yours, Greg?
They do move. So the first ones had a serial number on the side of the mount, and it said Nippon Kagaku across the bottom. And then they moved the serial number for the mount to the bottom, and that's different from the body. Doesn't actually have a serial number.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay.
And some of the base plates, mine does not, but some of the base plates have a serial number. I've got one with no serial number, but I also, if you notice, I have a non-Hansa Canon. I have a Canon original, which was after the Hansa relationship ended. So this one's about 1938 or so.
I think if you picked up the original, you picked it up from the factory itself.
Right. That's correct.
Yep.
Okay.
That's what this would have been, directly sold in Japan. And this one came from Japan.
I've seen some articles online incorrectly reference all early Canon rangefinders as Hansa Canons, as if it was part of the model name, but that's incorrect. Hansa was just a distributor, and they put their name on it for models that they distributed, but there were quite a few that were made, like what Greg has right there that just says Canon.
About half of them.
Yeah, I think it's about 50-50. I misspoke again. What I was trying to say, though, about the serial number is that the serial number on the mount was put there by Nippon Kugaku. That's not a Canon, or again, they were Seiki Kugaku at the time. But what he told me is that those mounts were so difficult to make that when Nippon Kugaku would start to make one, if there were any problems with it, they would just trash it and just make another one, and they would not reuse those numbers. So any attempt that has been made over the past 60, 70 years for people to try and track serial numbers of the mounts is almost a dead-end endeavor, because there's so many gaps. There's really no consistency in what those numbers mean, because there were so many that failed inspection and never got mounted to a camera. Greg, can you confirm, is there a little set screw somewhere on the bottom of the mount that you can see?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had heard urban legend. Now, I'm not recommending you do this, but I was told that if you remove that set screw, the mount actually comes off. The body still has the J mount behind it.
I think that this screw
Has to come out too.
has to come out as well. And that's where the rangefinder coupling, I believe, is occurring.
Yeah,
So yes, I have not felt the need to do that, but my
I would not
understanding is that
recommend it.
there is a what is it, the 24 threads per inch J mount thread underneath this lens mount. That's what I understand as well. And you'll have to ask somebody else to take theirs off.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's why nobody knows, is no one wants to do it.
I don't want to find out how the rangefinder coupling goes back together the hard
Right.
way.
Yeah, but it makes sense though, because if Canon was making the bodies and having someone else do the mount, then it stands to reason they had to put something there, and then it got shipped to another factory down the street, or have you, and then that was added later. So it is kind of interesting that there actually is a mount behind the mount, although it's not designed to let you see it easily. So.
And I think part of the provenance of the J was because they could not get enough mounts from Nippon Kogaku to make enough cameras to sell. And so they ultimately decided they could squint and say the 24 threads per inch was different enough for the J mount that they could make the J mount cameras.
Right. Well, and another thing that's interesting, if you dive into Nippon Kogaku's history, is prior to the war, they did not make civilian products. They made stuff pretty much strictly for the military. Notable exceptions are they did on occasion produce medical equipment, and then their work that they did for Seiki Kogaku was as a favor to some uncle or somebody. I don't remember the whole story, but they did these parts for Seiki Kogaku as sort of a favor to kind of help get more Japanese products out into the hands of photographers. And I think if they were having so much trouble producing these parts, that when the Canon started to get a little bit more production ramped up, they probably just weren't willing to keep making them, and they had to change something.
The Canon mount was 24 threads an inch, and the Leica 39 was 26. Did Canon make, or did Nikon make, did Nippon Kogaku or Seiki Kogaku, did they make any lenses other than 50 millimeters for Canon?
Yes, there is a wide angle. I have a picture of it on my site. It was a prototype. So one was made, but I don't believe any were ever really sold or got into the hands of photographers.
Yeah, Peter, I think, is having some audio issues, but he's the expert on that. But I believe that's correct. They did make the Nippon Kogaku lens they made it originally in the J mount, or the 24 threads per inch. And then somehow there's a combination of that and the body mounts that they came up with what they call the slop mount, or what has been called the slop mount, which can sort of accommodate either one. But I've always been anxious about that. I don't want to go cranking lenses onto bodies and change the brass threads the hard way.
That doesn't sound like a good idea. So what model switched over strictly to the Leica thread, 26 threads?
The S2 was where so the S2 began with the J mount and transitioned to the Leica mount.
And that would have been roughly 1946. 45.
Yeah, the transition would have been probably about 47.
Okay, interesting.
We were talking about what kept Canon alive during the war. Now this is I think 51 or 2, but it was the X-ray camera. It was Dr. Mitrai was one of the early investors in Seiki, and he wanted to produce cameras that could take images of fluoroscope images. So this was built for the military originally. They were taking X-rays to see if members might have tuberculosis. And of course, if you're standing live in front of a fluoroscope, you're getting a lot of radiation. But if you could take a picture very quickly or not, you can then have a record that you can refer back to, or have the doctors refer back to. So you could take a bunch of photos of crew very quickly. And so they were pretty well kept alive during the war because they were able to produce these X-ray cameras. So it's a big part of the DNA of Canon that they did that. Dr. Mitsurai's investment and then production throughout the war. They also had the fingerprint camera, which I think you guys talked about on the 18th episode. Yeah. Again, a product for the military.
It wasn't meant, I don't think, to be a robust system at that time. I don't really think that these guys really went into this saying we want to become the world's largest optical maker of, photocopiers and digital rangefinders, of course. Things back then were just, let's just get something out there. They made the original Canons different from the Leica to respect the German patents. After the war, they were able to go back and add the true Leica thread mount. They continue to innovate, right? Like there really isn't a single Canon rangefinder that I think can really be called a true Leica copy because the body shape was different. Which one was it where they first added the rotating prism?
That would be the 2B.
The 2B. And that
Yep.
was what, 49?
49.
49. Okay, yeah. So pretty quickly they added the feature that for me is one of the greatest features of the early post-war Canons is that the rangefinder window rotates. There's actually, I think there's 3 sides to it.
Yes.
And you have 1x or full. And for me, because my vision's terrible, right? So sometimes seeing through the squinty viewfinders can be problematic. Even when I shoot, like I have a Canon 4SB, even when I shoot that with a 50 millimeter lens, I prefer to use that camera by mounting a 50 millimeter auxiliary viewfinder to the top in the shoe, which is going to be much larger and brighter than the default one, but then rotating the rangefinder to the full size so that the entirety, like you look through the rangefinder window, the entire thing becomes the rangefinder. And it's so easy to use. It's a bright double image through the rangefinder. Yes, you do have to move your eye from one window to another, which I know some people don't like. But if you ever have an opportunity to shoot a Canon, like a 4SB or a 2B or whatever, like that, it's really fun and a lot nicer than it probably sounds with me explaining it this way.
Well, it's interesting because to me, the first real innovation was with the S2, or one of the big real innovations with the S2, where they did the combined rangefinder and viewfinder. And as somebody who, I grew up an SLR user and came to rangefinders very late in life, that single view to me is something I really like. And I know it's controversial. Some people prefer the Leica Leica never did that with their Barnack, their bottom loaders.
Right.
They always had a separate rangefinder and viewfinder. So Canon combined that in the S2. And then in the 2B, they added the magnified viewfinder rangefinder. And yeah, that was kind of their characteristic. And really none of the other Japanese Leica copies or Leica-like bottom loader cameras did that. That and possibly supply and demand and everything else may have led to why Canon became a household name, right? Because you had the service members that were stationed in Japan after the war buying these cameras and taking them home and appreciating them. And
that's one thing Canon did really well is they got in the post exchanges very early, even before Nikon did. And like what you just said there is the service people were able to pick these things up for inexpensive, bring them home, and that sort of spread the reputation of Canon, especially on the West Coast. C.R. Skinner was located in San Francisco, I believe. And a lot of the people who were coming home from Japan, you wouldn't fly all the way across Asia, across Europe, across the Atlantic Ocean to go to New York. You just flew across the Pacific or sailed, and you would land on the West Coast of the United States. So there was a lot of people coming home from Japan, from Korea, whatever, and they were able to pick up these cameras, and they were quite well made. And that sort of spread Canon's reputation, especially out on the West Coast, and allowed them to kind of get a leg up, Nippon Kugaku may have been the ones that helped them get going by building the lens mounts and the lenses and the rangefinders, but Canon grew much faster and had much better success at exporting things. And I believe that that's why they're still around today is they were one of the first Japanese companies to really get distribution right.
Well, it's not just the cameras themselves as well. They also progressed the lenses a lot faster than what Leica did. So while the Leica lenses have a particular look to them, in reality, if you look at it from a technical specification perspective, the Canon and the Nikon lenses were much more advanced. They were getting sharper. They were getting much better definition. Yeah, and that's why you've got that term, the Leica look with the Leica lenses, because it's actually a soft look. It's not necessarily, a more advanced look. But the Canon lenses, I mean, I love the Canon Leica thread mount lenses. They are really, really beautiful to use, easy to use, and the results are just really good compared to some of the older Leica lenses.
you see a lot of the Canon lenses on Leica cameras as well because of that.
Yes.
Especially the later ones.
So where they started off, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong. Here is an S2, a pretty early S2. This one I can trace back to, I know who bought it in Japan in 1946.
Wow.
And this still has the Nippon Kagaku lens on it. In fact, this has one of the ones that has the misprinted, but this one has the QO instead of the QC. It was misengraved. The other interesting thing, these cameras, you can imagine this is them trying to spin back up after the war, and resources were they were able to get the glass and the metal, but resources were so tight that they didn't use leather. This is a paper covering on this camera, because they just didn't have the material at that point. They didn't have access to it, and people were in pretty dire straits in Japan. So the companies being able to get access to any of these materials was quite a challenge. They really worked to get this back up and running and made quite a few of these cameras. And again, this is what put them on the map in my view, because this was the camera that the U.S. forces stationed in Japan really fell in love with, was that S2.
So, Greg, in your opinion, if someone listening to this show wants to try an older Canon, and let's say we want to resist the urge to say try the Canon 7, how far back would you recommend somebody go, but still have a pleasant to use camera, right?
I think we talked about the 2B was the first one that really added that magnified viewfinder, and so it's a great user camera. All of the cameras right after that, the 2D, the 4SB, all of those are very similar. They've kind of evolved. They improved the shutter, create the internals of the design. And then as you get into and they're very common now, you see like the 2S2, the 2D2, the 4SB2, those are starting to become pretty available. They have a very much improved viewfinder, brighter, larger, easier to peer through, versus the pre-war, the little tiny viewfinders that were traditional back then or common back then. Any of those cameras are good users as long as they are serviced, like any 50 to 90-year-old camera, they probably need some service to be fully functional, but you can usually get the middle speeds going on them pretty well. And if they clean up and they run and the shutters are in good shape, they're great little user cameras.
Best thing is you can drop them and pick them up and they keep going.
Yeah, they're durable. I've definitely got a lot of dented ones.
When we talk about the different models of the Canon rangefinders, assuming you don't have a book to help you identify it, there are a lot of different models. We're throwing around things like 4SB, 2B, but none of these things are ever printed anywhere on the body. So if you were to find, let's say you go to an estate sale or something and you see an old Canon camera there and you want to try and at least get a sense for what model it could be, are there things that you could look at that'll kind of help narrow down which model it might be?
There are 3 models with the model name inside if you take the base plate off.
Oh, really? Okay, so some of them do say under there?
2F, 2S, and 2D.
They don't all say that, right? So not all of the 2Ds say
No,
2D.
no, they don't all.
Right.
I must admit, I've got a couple here.
I think probably the easiest thing is if it's got a 1,000th shutter speed, then it's a 3 or a 4.
Right. The 2s stop at 1/500. So if you don't see the 1/1000th, then you know you have a 2. If it has the 1,000, but it's missing what?
Yeah, if it has a 1,000 and no flash rail, that's a 3. And the 3 is probably the best user camera just because of that. It omits in fact, I have a 4 that somebody took the flash rail off of that was sold as a 3. And I figured out, no, that's a 4. So it's probably the best user camera, but they aren't as common as the 4.
Right.
So
that's kind of where I was leaning towards, is it's not going to narrow down the exact one. You won't easily be able to tell the difference between a 4SB and a 4SB2, but at least you can kind of break down the major cameras by if it only goes to 1/500, then you have the 2. If it goes to 1/1000th but doesn't have the flash sync rail, then you have a 3. If it's 1,000 and you do have the sync rail, and then it's a 3. And then after the 4 I meant. And then after the 4 is when they started changing the looks of the camera quite significantly. So they're a little bit easier.
If you want the ones that have the improved viewfinder, they're called the 2D2, the 2F2, which is pretty rare, the 2S2, and the 4SB2. And the easiest way to tell those from the earlier cameras is that the crossover speed between the slow speed dial and the fast speed dial is 1/130th of a second instead of 1/25th, or 1/30th of a second versus 1/25th.
30th, yeah, 30th.
So if you want the final refined Canon Barnack type bottom loading rangefinders, look for the 1/30th on the low speed dial and the 1000 or 500, either one, on the high speed dial, because the 2s and the 4s are great.
Yeah, the 4SB2 was probably the ultimate bottom loader for Canon.
I want to move on to the backloaders, but we have a lot of people who haven't spoken yet. So does anybody have any questions or stories about any of the earlier models that they are curious to share?
If I could,
You've got a flash rail on that one, Joan. So it's a full.
I do. And it's also, I was so fortunate to get one of those flash rails to PC adapters.
Oh, yeah, they're pretty uncommon, those.
Yes. And the best thing about this little camera, and I'm so sorry because this thing is so small, but this was posted on, you know where at, as an EP camera, and I ended up with a 4SB2 for a heck of a deal. So
yeah, the EP, there's a lot of controversy over that one, the naming of it actually, but people have got different ideas what EP actually means. So I go down exchange post, some people tax or whatever it is, so it doesn't worry me.
Listings almost never get the ID right. It may say it's a 4SB2 and it'll be a 2S2 or something.
30th designation is what dictates a revolutionary camera, as Peter Deckard called them.
A couple episodes ago, Paul had commented on how much he hates trying to identify Rolleiflexes, but we got to throw the Canon Rangefinders up there too, because sometimes they can be a little bit tricky to identify too.
We have cheat sheets. You have to have a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Well, Deckard never even tried to get the serial numbers. He just says a usual serial number will be, and then he'll put in some random number. But to try to come up with the range on them is just impossible.
Yeah, it's hard.
Well, and even, and Paul Sock's great site tries to capture that, and he has Peter Deckard's numbers and he has found numbers, and a few of us keep sending him examples that are outside of his ranges. So they're all over the place.
Best thing is stick it all in an Excel and then do a sort.
And I did ask Paul if he wanted to come on this episode, and he was busy. So we could have had Oceania domination of Paul Sock, Theo. I don't know if anybody noticed, but Sherlock popped in here for a minute and then he disappeared. So I guess he didn't want to talk about cannons tonight.
Well, between the Australian, New Zealanders, and Canadians, I think we're starting to outnumber the Americans these days.
Yeah.
I'm a little out for the win, and my mom's originally from New Zealand, so there you go.
Nice.
Kiwi.
I got both hemispheres covered.
We're a dying breed.
Joan, which lens do you have on your 4SB2?
I have the 50 millimeter Canon f1.8.
1.8, okay.
Yeah, standard lens.
Yes.
I love that lens.
The sleeper lens that I can't believe that how uncommon they are and how popular, if you do find one, is the 25 millimeter f3.5.
I've got two of them.
Who has two?
Yeah,
Peter?
in a box.
Okay. None of you happened to buy those from me, did you? Because I had 4 of them at one point, like 3 years ago. And I should have kept one. I didn't. That was that's an excellent lens.
The 19 mils are a hard little one to come by too.
The 19, yeah.
Yeah, that's on.
What's the one Jeremy's holding up?
It is the 25 3.5.
Oof.
Nice.
That's a 25.
Really tiny, really thin lens, pancake style.
Is that lens element like 7 millimeters in diameter?
Yeah,
It looks
very light.
tiny.
Pretty small.
So one of the funny things with Canon is they seem to launch cameras without wide angle lenses because, they launched their Barnack rangefinders and they had the 50 was the widest thing that they had for, I think, a couple of years. I think until the early 50s. Peter, when did the 35 millimeter
3.5.
f3.5 came out?
Yeah, that was the first one.
That was years later.
I think it was only a year or so after the 2B was introduced.
Yeah, after the 2B, you're right. So I think it was a 50 or 51, right? So, but they've been making cameras for years.
Book and have a look at that one.
They did the same thing with their SLRs. The Canon Flex came out without a wide angle also.
That's what I was going to say is they launched the exact same thing. It took them a couple of years to come up with a wide angle lens.
So let's move on to the backloaders. We switched to the Model 5, right? They had a large number of those too. Some of them even they explored the idea of the trigger wind, right? Which was something that they continued with on the SLRs too. But do you want to tackle the bottom or the backloaders, Greg? Or
I can certainly try. they came out. What was first, the VT, the
V.
5T? I say the V.
Yeah,
They
5T,
originally
VT.
they were just going to call it the 5, and then they decided to make a they added the T essentially because it was the trigger wind version, because pretty quickly they needed to have the lever wind, the L, and they have the 5L. They had, I think, what is there's controversy about the timing of the L series, the L1, 2, and 3, and
Oh,
the 5L, and exactly when each of them was marketed versus when they actually hit the market. But they came up with their lever wind cameras pretty quickly thereafter. But I think both the 5T and the 5L, they were very much feature wise very similar to the Leica M's. They were still an Leica thread mount as opposed to an M mount. And they really kind of were going for that market, but it was a very high-end camera, and they didn't sell a ton of them. I think they made only a few thousand of each because they weren't just big sellers for Canon.
Question, Greg, how durable were those trigger winders?
I have not heard of
pretty
much
good,
trouble
actually.
with them. They're pretty, yeah. So they had a trigger winder. They did just like a speed winder. They came up with a trigger winder for the all of the cameras from the 3 and 4 and the 2D up. All the 50,000 and higher serial number cameras could support a rapid winder, trigger winder, kind of like the Leica speed winder. So they had a little bit of experience with it, and so the 5T and the 6T, I've not heard of really any durability problems. Plus, they still had knob wind option on the top. You could still wind and use these cameras, just on the top, so you didn't have to use the trigger.
Okay, so it's like a backup then. I just sort of curious if I come across one in the wild because, I'm more of a rear opening Canon rangefinder guy. So if I see one in the wild and everything checks out, at least I can have some comfort that the trigger is not going to be like one of those
No.
nightmare fixes.
I'll tell you, the 6T and the 6L, and probably the 6L because I like the lever winders, but I actually like both. They're probably my favorites. They're really very nicely high-end cameras. They still have the magnified viewfinder, and yeah, they're tanks. They seem to just keep going. But again, they were expensive and they were not as successful for Canon. So what they basically did is they decided to take the 6L because the lever wind was definitely catching on in popularity, right? More than the trigger wind. And because you didn't have to take it off of any kind of an accessory or tripod or anything to use. You could still use the knob wind on the trigger winds, but it was just, wasn't as fast, and people like the lever wind cameras. And across the market, you saw that happen. So what they did is they basically took the 6L and they made it into the P. And the very first models of the P, if you open them up, are basically 6Ls on the inside. And then over the manufacturing era of the P, they evolved it and made it a little bit less expensive for them to make because it was sold at a lower price. And that's what they called it the popular model. They have a history of calling cameras popular models, the P. And that was one of their first really big successful cameras where they sold a large number of them, tens of thousands of them, which was a lot for those cameras back in the day.
What I think is interesting is those models came out already after Leica had released the M3. So if there was any thought that screw mount rangefinder cameras were losing popularity, Canon proved that wasn't true because the P, up until the point when the P came out, it became their highest selling model. And then when the 7 came out, that one superseded even the P in terms of sales. If you look at Deckard's book, he has like estimates of production values. And a fun fact that I think is interesting is the Canon 7, if you combine the 7 and 7S together as one model, there were more Canon 7s sold than all Nikon rangefinders of all models combined. It was a very successful camera. And considering it was originally supposed to compete with Leica, and when did the G come out? The G was like 57, I think. The 3G.
57, 58.
Yeah, but that was it for lights though. Like they were fully invested into the M series. They continued to make the screw mount cameras for the loyalists, I think. But like Canon was selling them like crazy. And even some of the other Japanese companies were doing pretty good business too. So if you were to combine all Japanese screw mount rangefinder cameras compared to the original Leicas, they were selling way better and they were really well made. And I just think that if for the people who were in that market and had some money to spend on an interchangeable lens rangefinder camera, the Canons were just such a tremendous value compared to an M3, for the same era and optically.
There's the cost, the difference in cost.
Right, big difference, but the quality was excellent. Very, very good.
But the later black Canon lenses were the equivalent of some of the Leica ones at the time.
Yeah, especially the Japanese Summilux, the 51.4.
Yeah, the 51.4, the legendary 51.4.
I inherited my dad's, which I used on my M3 for a while because I had the lens. My brother got the 3G because so I had this 51.4 lens, so I had the M mount adapter for it. So I just ran it with my M3 when I wasn't using the collapsible Summicron, and that lens is insanely good. And I remember taking my M3 in for service once to a store called Halton Camera Exchange, northwest of Toronto. The guy who owned it was a factory-trained Leica tech who's sadly no longer with us. He looked at that lens. It's like, damn, that's a good lens.
Pays itself for so little money, though. I mean, you can pick those up all day, like $180.
Bill, I was going to tell you that I've got a 5T Deluxe with a trigger winder, and I just shoot the crap out of that camera. I put more rolls through that than any Canon rangefinder, any other model that I've had, and that trigger winder has just worked flawlessly.
There you go.
So don't be worried about that. I also have a 4SB that unfortunately has got crinkleitis on the shutter and is capping so bad that it's unusable. It's a shame because it looks like it's brand new, but the shutter is shot. So I'm debating whether it's worth the money to pay somebody to put a new shutter in or just go fishing for another body because they're it's about the same price.
Are you going to find another body with the same level of cosmetic condition?
It would be hard to. This one literally looks like it was unboxed last week.
You need to talk to Doug Wallaby. I mean, that's a challenge for Doug. To put new shutter curtains in your Canon rangefinder camera. He'd probably love to do it.
Okay. Get me his contact info.
We have to emphasize Doug is not taking repair work for anyone except his friends, but he has a lot of friends.
Maybe he should just send you the camera and you can send it to him.
But he has a Hasselblad 500 millimeter lens of mine right now that the shutter needed service on, and I said, "Can you do this?" And he says, "Okay." So he does it.
I've got a friend. I'm not doing it myself commercially. I just do this for my own cameras, but I've got a friend who's doing it commercially. I don't know that he would want me to advertise him here, but Anthony, I can get you in touch with him too if Doug is booked up or anything.
I appreciate that.
Well, you were talking about the trigger winders. The Leicavits are just, they're old. First of all, they're old, but they also are very problematic, and I've never seen that problem with the Canons. The Leicavits have chains in them, and the chains were really always the weakest link of the system. And Tom Abramson, when he made his Abramson winders for Leica cameras, went away from a strict chain drive to a different system and never had any problems. So I think he probably copied the Canons. Though I haven't been into one.
It's the weak point in the Droog also, right? The other.
Yeah, it is. I was just
winder.
going to say that we call it the bicycle chain, but the Soviets did not have the knack for refined trigger winds like the Japanese did, because the drug it can either fail entirely, or if it does work, it's extremely tight.
Here's a 4SB2 with the trigger with the rapid winder, which was sold as an accessory or sold as an original. There's actually also a handlebar. I don't have it on this one. That you could use so you could hold it by that and do the wind. So I didn't show that on the camera, but you could hold it by the handlebar and wind it.
That's interesting. So you could order the camera with either the standard base plate or the trigger wind plate.
Yeah. They had cases that were designed for this as well. You could get them with the leather case that accommodated the height of the rapid winder and had the slot for the trigger.
Cool. That's interesting. I can't remember who the distributor was for Canon products in the 50s.
Wasn't it Bell and Howell?
That was in the
later.
60s, yeah.
Yeah, that was later. That was the 60s and 70s.
The first one was definitely Skinner. I don't remember if there was one after that, though.
Who was it?
C.R. Skinner was the first. I mentioned it in San Francisco.
They were that was very common because you had camera stores would set themselves up as a distributor.
Right. The mythical Canon 1950 edition, which is a collector applied label, but it's I think only like 40 of them were made, but they were made because C.R. Skinner took, I don't know the whole story, but they took like an old model and put some new parts on it and wanted to sell it exclusively through their store or something. I know I'm botching the history there, but the gist of it is C.R. Skinner is the reason that camera exists.
It was actually sent out by Canon as a test thing to Skinner.
That's okay. Yeah, I knew it was tied to them. But who did the distribution after Skinner? I'm not sure.
So we were laughing earlier about the Canon Dream Lens and why it was called the Dream Lens. It isn't because people dreamed about having that lens because it was so special. It was because it was so out of focus at 0.95.
Look at that monster.
It was actually an English reviewer doing a review on the lens, called it the Dream Lens, and that took on from there.
When did that happen?
Oh, shortly after. It was in one of the English magazines, apparently.
Okay.
And he just called it the Dream Lens, and that sort of moniker stuck.
I'd call it the Vaseline lens because to me it looks like you put Vaseline on the front element, and when it's wide open, it's so incredibly soft. That's a lens that is, I mean, it's technically impressive. You know, it has a maximum aperture of f/0.95 for the era in which it was made. Very impressive, but I can't stress this enough. If you're a collector today and you want to shoot a fast lens, it's a lot of money. And when you look at the images it makes wide open, I'm not a fan.
Was it Stanley Kubrick who was using those on a bunch of his movies?
It was used for they made actually two versions of it. They made it with a C mount and they made it with the Canon P mount.
That's right. And that's the ones he used on like Barry Lyndon, right? I think that was the one.
Those were that was the Canon. They'll be marked TV on the lens itself. It'll be marked as such.
It's a bayonet mount that is, anybody that knows Canon SLRs, it would look familiar, but it's just smaller. And the 7 and the 7S have that flange on the front that has both the Leica threads and that you can see the tabs for the bayonet, which it holds two accessories. It holds this lens and it holds the mirror box 2 that was made for the 7s.
That was going to be a trivia question, Greg, but you already knew the answer, so I couldn't ask it.
And DAG will convert those to M mount if
right,
if that's your cup of tea. So he did one for a guy I know recently.
A lot of the TV ones have been converted for Leica use.
They're a little bit more readily converted, I think, from what I've seen. But yeah, the big thing with that lens and another lens that, based upon the market, you can get for about 1/10 as much, is that they have sort of built-in spherical aberration that's been left into the design, and that's part of the dreamy look, the glowy look. So it's not just the shallow depth of field; it's SA that's left in the design, and the other one that does that is the 50 f1.2.
Yeah.
So the trick with those is finding a copy that's not hazed, because they have an issue with some of the rear elements getting a haze that can't be cleaned, at least not via normal means.
I have one like that, and I sent it to Alan Wade, and he sent it right back to me. Said I can't do it.
Yeah,
he didn't even try.
You get into every bit of it except that rear element.
Yeah,
there's outgassing going on in there, and I was cleaning mine about every 6 months, except for that rear element, which you just can't do anything with.
It actually hazes the glass gets etched. And it's not fungus etching. It's something else that's going on chemically with the coating and the glass. And there are theories on what you could do about that. And I wouldn't even say it here because I wouldn't recommend you do it to your lens. But if you can find one that's clear, they're wonderful. And again, they're about 1/10 the going price of the Dream lens.
Yeah, I have two. One of them's good. One of them's messed up. So I keep the messed up one as like a nice display. It looks pretty on the shelf.
I have 3. One of them is badly hazed. One of them is a tiny bit hazed, and one of them is crystal clear. And I use the badly hazed one sometimes. But it's like having the world's best pro mist filter.
If I can make a quick correction, the film studies professor in me is coming out. It's that Kubrick did not use the Dream lens. He had a Carl Zeiss planar 50 f/0.7 that had been developed for NASA, and it was adapted for him to shoot Barry Lyndon. So he was shooting Zeiss like Zeiss faster than the Dream lens for his film, and not the Dream lens.
What was the optical design of that one?
It's a planar. It's built for NASA.
It's a planar?
Yeah, it's a planar.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, 50-0.7.
While you were talking, I found there's a short Wikipedia article that mentions it, and there's actually a picture of the lens that he used.
Yeah, I've seen it in person. There was a Kubrick exhibit at the museum in San Francisco, and they had like an entire room of just his cameras and lenses that he used, because he was also a very avid still photographer and was pretty particular about what he shot with. But yeah, it was pretty cool. But it's not the Dream lens; it's a Zeiss lens.
That's awesome. Thank you.
If you're familiar with the speed boosters that are currently made to allow you to attach full frame SLR lenses to mirrorless cameras with APS-C cameras, and it reduces the focal length and increases the aperture, the Zeiss 50mm f/0.7 was kind of a predecessor of that same sort of optical design. That was how they achieved that really fast speed of basically making a planar symmetrical lens design, but then adding what was essentially a speed booster type condenser lens to the rear of it.
I wondered. So yeah, they did add more elements basically. Okay, that makes sense.
So if we want to find a movie where the Dream lens was used, according to Google, Zack Snyder's 2021 Netflix film Army of the Dead.
Oh, that's right.
A variety of 095 1960s Canon rangefinder lenses mounted to an 8K red digital cinema camera. So that's probably what we meant to say instead of Barry Lyndon, because Army of the Dead and Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece are on the same level of. I'm just kidding,
of course.
So I mean, it's cool. I mean, I have a tendency to shit on that lens just partially because of the price. I think people sometimes link value to performance, and I mean, unless there's something very specific about that look that you want, the prices just keep going up. I mean, what's the going rate for one right now? $3,000?
You'll see them in good condition. They're starting around 1,800.
Okay, all right. That's not
but they
as bad as I
go
thought.
quickly up from there.
Okay, maybe I've seen all of the ups from there.
But Mike, you look so cool when you're actually using it, because it just looks cool. Is that worth the price?
Got to take the lens
There's
cap
a
off.
guy in our photography group in Toronto who has a 7SZ with that Dream lens, and that's his walk around.
That's a heavy walk around. This thing is a beast.
Yeah, that is heavy.
I walk around with the 35 too on this thing.
That's a more sensible lens.
So, okay, I know Canon for a very short while had a 50mm f1.5. What's the story on that lens? Was that just a stopgap until they came out with a 1.4?
Just a faster 1.8.
Well, it was sonar based, right? So their 51.5 was a sonar design.
I think there were three f1.5 Canon lenses. The first one is called the Wasp Waist lens, and that's impossible to find. They also made one labeled Serenar for the I don't remember which one it is, but it's a thread mount lens. And then they came out with a Canon lens, Canon labeled lens also.
So
but they're all 1.5.
See if you can. You're not going to be able to see the beauty ring on this one. So this is that CX35 X-ray camera I showed a little while ago. This is the later one, a 1951 or two. This one has the production 51.5, the same optical block that's in the rangefinder LTM, like a thread camera. But this is one of the very first ones. I believe it's 10105, serial number 10105, and it says Serenar on it. And I think, Peter, there's maybe a couple hundred of them that are labeled Serenar, because this was at the point in the early 50s when they switched over to calling them just Canon lens. But that's a sonar design.
Yeah, well, most of them have R Serenar.
Well, so this was after the R. So the R Serenars were black bodied lenses. This one, it's inside the cone, but it's a silver bodied lens. I think we discussed it's part of the same optical block run as the rangefinder camera lens. They were serial numbers consecutive. The optical block's the same. It was just the mount that was different. The body of the lens, because it's got its own helicoid. Either. It's got its own helicoid for the X-ray.
Well, the X-ray lenses didn't have apertures.
Right. No aperture, no shutter. It has a dark slide.
while you guys were talking in the Zoom chat, Jeremy Scott took a picture of this podcast using the Dream Lens.
All right.
We'll have to save that one. It's very dreamy. I will give you that. What camera did you put it on? What's it on, Jeremy?
It's on my Nikon ZF.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to buy the adapter special for it, of course.
Life is imitating the podcast, I guess we could say. Very cool. So the Dream Lens you had touched upon this already, Greg. It used the external bayonet. They never made another lens that used the external bayonet other than the reflex housing. The 7 is the only Canon rangefinder that has the dual mount. I heard somebody mention, I think it might have been Bill, the 7SZ or 7SZ. What's the difference between the 7SZ versus the non-Z version?
It's the port adjustment at the top.
Yeah, the rewind knob on the 7SZ or Z for the Americans in the studio audience is slightly bigger. They only made, I think, the 7SZ/Z in my birth year, 68.
Wasn't there a change to the viewfinder in that they changed the reflection?
That's a bit of an urban myth. I'm not sure that that's true.
Is it okay?
It's often quoted, but I'm not sure that observation bears it out. There are 3 changes, and first of all, 7SZ or 7SZ was a Peter Deckert name creation again. Canon just called it the 7S. They didn't acknowledge that it was different, but they did. They made 3 changes in the course of the 7S that ultimately the 7SZ incorporates. And the first and the most recognizable is that larger rewind knob.
Mm-hmm.
They removed the bayonet from the strobe connection. So prior models had a bayonet on the strobe connection, and the 7SZs will have the meter window. This is going to be really hard to see on camera. The meter window is on top instead of inside the glass. Now there's one more change right above where it says the N, the second N in Canon. Do you see that port?
The rangefinder adjustment.
That's the rangefinder adjustment. They moved it from over near the speed dial,
right,
which is a much harder place to service, over to that spot, which is much easier to service.
So if you're on eBay trying to find one of these, you want the Z, it is directly above the second N in Canon.
Yeah,
that's the easiest thing to see probably,
right.
Is you want that
visually
port above this. Then that's kind of the last change. Also look for serial numbers above about 118,000 or so.
I have been employing that trick because rather than the problem is if a seller knows that it's a 7SC and they list it that way, they're going to ask for more money, right? So the trick is to find somebody who doesn't realize what it is, and then maybe you can get it for a little bit cheaper. And I have to curse.
My secret.
Right. I have to curse Sherlock. He's not here. But ever since his episode, which has been 2 shows now, he was talking about that infuriating Retina 2, the Type 122. And I want one. And they're really hard to find. And the only one that's for sale on eBay, the guy's asking a ridiculous amount for. So what I've been doing is I've memorized the shape of the top plate, and I keep searching for just Retina 2, hoping that I'm going to find one that the person doesn't know what it is. And hasn't worked out yet, but sometimes when you're good at spotting visual differences between specific cameras, you can see things like that. And it might take, months or even years to find, but you can on occasion get a deal on a rare variant of a camera if there's one tiny little cosmetic difference that's sort of easy to spot just by looking at a whole bunch of images that perhaps the seller.
Did you try Etsy?
No, I don't go on Etsy.
I know, but that's where you may find it.
Really?
On that note, if you remember a year ago that I had hopped on and I bought this combination right here, the 7SZ with the Dream Lens, which I saw at a local estate sale. And the photo, it had the lens cap on here, but I could tell what this lens was just by that photo and nothing else.
By how huge it was?
And yep, and I made a beeline for it, and it was the enviable price of $300.
Holy crap.
Wow.
So Jeremy, can you see anything through the viewfinder window with that hood on?
You get about, 2/3 of a view. Well, especially with the lens hood on there, it clips it. So yeah, the center at the bottom is covered completely. Without the lens hood, yeah, you're losing about a quarter of the view through the viewfinder.
I'm going to try not to go off topic too much here. We're not talking about Argus, but there was an Argus lens made for the G4 Geiss, which was a 135 millimeter telelithogon made by Enowork, and the barrel on it was huge. And they made this hood for it that was even huger. And it had that same problem of it's so large, it physically blocked the view through the viewfinder. So their solution, I don't know if you guys can see this, they actually made the back part of the hood out of glass. So you have the lens barrel, and then there's the hood, which is a larger diameter, but the thing that's connecting the hood to the lens is a big piece of glass. So you can
awesome.
see right through it.
I assume that's why a lot of hoods are ported as well. You know, a lot of hoods have a gap,
Yeah,
have a
little
hole. And I
gaps.
assume that's so you can quite literally so you can see through it.
I've never heard of another company besides this that did that, made it out of glass.
Does the front rotate with that one, Mike? Is that why they did glass rather than having some, just cutting out a portion of it?
I have no idea. You'd think that cutting out a hole would be easier than making a piece out of glass, because I don't want to try and drop this, but I imagine that they don't last very long after you do that.
Yes.
Anyways.
Canon made two lenses, two hoods like that, one for the 85 1.5 lens and the 50mm 1.2 lens. Both those hoods have viewing holes in the back.
Holes in them, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, which you can look through.
Does anybody have any idea why the 85 millimeter Canon 1.5 lens is so much more expensive than a Summerex lens?
Word got out that you're looking for one, and they want to.
The movie people are getting hold of them.
Yeah, it's supply and demand. There aren't a ton of the 85 1.5, so yeah, they go for ridiculous amounts. And it's only so much better than the 85 1.8 or 9 or the 85 f2.
Well, there's a firm in England that's actually I forget the name, Lens something. They're actually converting a lot of rangefinder lenses into cine lenses.
Yeah, that's what I heard also, that cinematographers are using them.
Yeah, that's the same problem with why Leica R-mount lenses are impossible to find anymore, is they're all getting converted. They're getting declicked.
God, I was on a Leica R lens tear this past spring. It's an expensive endeavor.
Yeah.
Well, it's whatever somebody makes a film with that hits at least among the filmmaker community, and what did you use? And then everybody has to go buy that. That's where the Canon SLR lenses suddenly got expensive, and then once they exhausted that, I think we've recently discussed that now the Vivitar lenses are suddenly, which have always been dirt cheap, right, are suddenly getting popular because somebody made a film with one.
Yeah. And
is it just it's vibes.
When collectors only had to compete with other collectors, the prices were at least manageable. But as soon as, because Ira, you don't use these things. You're not going to go out and shoot that 85-1.5. You just want it for your collection. But see, you're competing against influencers who want to use these to make student films. So and they have a much more disposable budget, we'll say. I mean,
Deep pockets.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's hip. It's they want the cool influencer lenses, and they're willing to pay for it.
Mike, are you saying I'm not hip?
Ira, you're hip in a different kind of way. Dr. Dan jokes are really good for our little subculture here, but I feel like your TikTok skills aren't quite as good as some of these other guys are.
Yeah. All I can say is people should start filming films with Jupiter lenses, because then I'll be sitting on the gold mine.
or into stars.
Didn't Denny Villeneuve use like a Helios 44 with Dune?
44-2, I think, or something like that.
The one thing that has kept the Helios 44 though influencer proof is I think they made 1 billion of them. Like legit. Yeah. They've made so many of those lenses that it has survived the onslaught of the swirly bokeh. You take a lens that was made in more modest quantities, as soon as it becomes desirable, the prices skyrocket. But the Helio, I mean, maybe it's not 1 billion, but I mean, they made a ton of those lenses.
They made a lot.
Oh yeah.
They made a lot.
My Nixie tube clock that I have behind me, the Soviet Union produced those Nixie tubes for like 40 years, and they just made warehouses and warehouses of them to where people can repurpose them for, clocks now or something.
But is that not correct? That probably just part of the system, part of the Soviet system They said, we're going to make lenses. This factory is going to make lenses. You're going to make lenses whether there's demand or not. You're just going to keep making lenses. And so they wind up with warehouses, and it happens to all of the products, not just cameras and lenses, where they end up with warehouses of these things that are decades old.
Right.
And then now they've been freed up. It's maybe a little bit harder to get them out of Russia at this point. There have been quite a few of them for sale just because they were warehoused.
And they're scattered all over the former Soviet Union, because I've heard of a case recently in Kazakhstan where somebody had like a warehouse that just brand new in the box, all sorts of different Soviet lenses and bodies.
That's a whole other topic. I'm curious. I don't want to take us on that fork, but I have some wondering about that because I've done that too. But then I kind of wonder, am I really getting it from Ukraine?
You are.
That's another fork in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, just to answer it quickly, though, there's always been a large number of very honest sellers from the Ukraine. It's a very safe, even now, country to export stuff from, from Ukraine to here, or the U.S., wherever you're getting it from. And I don't think I've ever had a problem, ever. I've had worse problems getting things from Canada than I have from Ukraine.
Yes. I do too. I've bought quite a few from Ukraine. I'm very happy with several sellers from there. I've kind of have ongoing conversations with a couple of them just because we've gotten to know each other a little bit. And yes, I agree. I just had wondered if any of them are sort of fronting because you can't buy them from Russia right now. But I hope they're all legitimate. The ones that I have talked to certainly seem to be.
Has anybody had any trouble buying stuff from the EU? Because I've tried getting stuff and they said they just won't ship to the United States.
There are certainly people who don't want to ship to the United States, and they may have lots of reasons for that. And we sort of are good at giving people reasons for that. But
if I were to do a private sale, say I'm shipping from Toronto to you, Ira, I'm on the hook for your duty.
Yeah.
Really? I got
all the tariffs that you're supposed to get. I have to prepay that.
I think they're collecting on both ends then, because
you're paying, they probably are.
I've been paying like through the nose for those tariffs.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you pay the shipping companies a privilege fee just to figure out whether or not you owe a duty.
Yeah, and UPS is the worst of the lot because if they decide to ship you economy, that brokerage fee is an expensive hit.
And I will say I've probably had the least trouble getting stuff from Ukraine, to take it back to that, versus things take a long time to get here from the UK, from the other parts of or from the EU. I've had stuff come from India and Japan, and even I've gotten stuff stuck coming from Canada. But the Ukraine has actually been very good. I only had one mishap with that, and that was the U.S. Postal Service lost it in New York. And then 3 months later, the lens showed up.
At least it showed up.
Yeah. By then, actually, that wonderful Ukraine seller had already sent me another lens. But thankfully, he had a U.S. warehouse, and I sent him the duplicate back.
That was nice of you. So before we really wrap up, though, I want to at least touch upon, this is Canon Rangefinders. They did make some pretty decent fixed lens ones, too. So let's quickly talk about maybe some of the fixed lens Canon Rangefinders. We were talking earlier about the trigger winds, and they made the Canonet 19, which was, I think, the first fixed lens one, also had the trigger wind. And I have one of them, and it's a very pleasant, it has really all of the benefits of the later interchangeable lens rangefinders, meaning a good lens, a sharp 6-element sub, f2 lens, a bright viewfinder, parallax frame lines, good build quality. It is a leaf shutter, so it doesn't have the focal plane shutter. But I'm quite fond of the Canon fixed lens, the Canonets as well, even though, you can't change the lenses on them. But I was wondering if anybody here had any experience with any of the Canonets.
I think the QL17 it's a great camera. They made 3 versions of it. The original, and then they made a Generation 2, and then I think the Gen 3, which is the one you see the G3 pretty often, is the 2 and the 3 are smaller. They're a little bit more compact. Still all the same features, still that great lens.
40 millimeter, my favorite focal length.
41.7, a great little lens. And I think the only difference between the Gen 2 and the G3 is maybe a battery check LED on the back. I think they're
so.
Very
it's something
similar.
Electrical, right?
They're usable fully, but they're still usable fully manual, which is a big thing for me because I don't trust the old sensors.
What's the difference between that one and the first one? Is there anything significantly different? Because they sell for a lot cheaper.
They're much
It's
larger.
It's much larger, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that all?
That's basically, yeah, just got basically the same lens on it.
The G3 QL17 was probably in that era, which would have been like 65 to 72, somewhere in there. That camera and the Yashica Electro 35 were sold in drugstores. So they were sold to a lot of families bought those cameras, and they really were good cameras. Today, the problem is that the batteries are sort of problematic because they did use a mercury battery, use the PX13.
Well, that's the key thing. The difference between the Yashica, the Electro 35, and the Canonet is you can use the Canonet fully manual. The Yashica is an automatic exposure camera, so you can get a battery adapter for that to use like an LR44 battery.
You could, and it was close enough.
But you still have to have a battery.
If you're shooting color negatives with it, it didn't really matter. The only thing I don't like about the Canon is they had the world's worst light seals. The stuff just totally turned to goo.
Well, and they're large. They're very large light seals. Not as bad as Ricoh, but they definitely use more.
I think it's interesting that the industry went from not having light seals and from having designs that were just light tight to suddenly they decided they had a less light tight design and added light seals, and everybody made them out of stuff that turns to goo. So you end up having to replace it if you want to use the camera these days. But they're great little cameras, the fixed lens rangefinders. And you were talking about the original Canonet. The interesting thing is the trigger wind on that is a it goes round.
Axial.
It doesn't go side to side. It's like the Canon Flex, it's like the Canon Flex SLR.
Right. So what he's talking about is it still works the same way, but when you pull it in, it swings behind the camera.
It's a little bit more natural motion.
If you pay attention to how your fingers move when you sort of pull it in, it tends to kind of curve backwards, and the arm sort of follows the natural motion of the way your hand moves up.
Okay.
The Ricoh 500 and the Ricoh 519 are the same way too, where it's axial, it's not linear.
The Canonet the Canonet 28 was the lesser version that did not have only had programmed exposure.
And they made a Canonet QL25 in the larger form factor. They had the QL17 and the 19, and then they made a 25, which was an f2.5 lens, a Tessar based lens, I think. And it was just because it was cheaper, and that was in the larger form factor. And then when they made the smaller form factor, QL25.
QL25.
And then in the smaller form factor, you're right, they made it as the QL28, but it was the same idea. It was a 4-element, I believe, Tessar-like lens. It was just a less expensive lens compared to I forget if the 40 1.7 is a 6 or 5 or 6 element lens. I got to go back and look at it. I don't recall, but it's a planar based, double Gauss based design.
Well, what's interesting, I'm just having a look at the prices at the moment, and the G3, so the third iteration, used to be super expensive compared to the other versions, but it seems to have evened out a little bit now. There's not a
there are a lot of them.
Yeah, there's not a huge difference now.
The earlier ones I've had trouble finding one that works. The Gen 2 and the G3, and I call it just the Gen 2. I think that's what Canon calls it too. That I haven't found one that didn't work.
Well, speaking of this, in case anyone wonders, does this happen to the podcasters too? Live on episode 109, as I'm holding this thing in front of you, this camera stopped working. So I have my beloved Canon 19, which I'm telling you guys is such a great camera. I fired it about 3 times, and on the 4th time, now there's nothing.
Oh no, you did it. You're not supposed to do that, right? You only fire it 3 times.
So on air, I had a camera die on me.
That's actually, you mentioned, and I'm sorry to hear about your camera, Mike, but you mentioned the 19, and there was a 25 as well, if I remember correctly. In terms of, apart from the slower lens, is the quality any less on those than the 17?
It's the same. It's mechanically the same camera with a cheaper lens.
And unless you're constantly shooting the 1.9 wide open, I mean, let's be honest, you're probably going to be shooting at f8, or smaller. And the difference at that point between the 1.9 and the 2.5, you'll never see the difference.
Mike, check on your camera. Check to see what your aperture setting is, because if you've accidentally switched it over to the automatic sides,
Yeah,
that's
it's
when it
not.
stops working. Okay, that's a common problem you see on these, and you think it's not working. You just have to change the aperture to a manual setting.
How I know that is I can wind it, hit the button, and then I can wind it again. So it's going
Uh-oh.
through the motions, but the shutter's just not cycling. So it just needs some love, I guess. I'll
Lighter
just put
fluid,
it
Mike. Lighter fluid.
lighter fluid. Yeah, I'll just put it on the shelf and pretend like it works. That was Norris, by the way. Hey, Norris.
Hello, everyone.
Do you have any recent Canon pickups to share with us?
Hiccups or hiccups?
Either would be fine.
Hiccup. I've got a nice little Seiki coming in from Japan.
Uh-huh.
Has not arrived. I'm eagerly waiting for it to arrive. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Thanks to Greg, I picked it up at a very nice price.
So
for
wait a
what it
minute,
is.
wait a minute. You guys were both aware of the same camera for sale at the same time. Was this?
We were bidding on the same camera at the
Right.
same time.
But once you were aware that you were going head to head, was there like rock, paper, scissors, or like what'd you guys do?
I asked very nicely, and knowing that Greg's already got probably his hands on many, and I said, pretty please, will you let us common folks have a experience of this camera?
Yeah. I thought it was going to go. He got an incredible deal for this camera, by the way. I thought it was going to go for a lot more. I had thrown in a bid for fun, but I already had a Model S. We're talking about that Model S, right? I already had a Model S.
Yep.
So I was like, oh, hey, if it comes for this price, I'll take it. And I thought it would go for quite a bit more. And Norris got it for what, $25 more than my max bid. And I said, he just asked it. I said, sure, it's yours, man. It's in the family, and that's what I care about.
Greg is very nice. I was ready to go much higher, probably twice what I ended up paying for it.
We both expected it to go much more.
Yeah, I thought it was going to get bidden up probably the last minute or 10 seconds as it usually does. But I was surprised it went. No one else looked at it.
You got a beautiful camera for a great price for what those go for.
I can't wait.
As a sideline, there's an auction coming up in Lights Auctions in Austria.
Don't tell anybody about that one. Please.
7SZ?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, you're right. That one's you're fine. Go. You're good.
Yeah, 7SZ. They actually identified it as just a straight 7S, but it's actually a 7SZ, and that's an auction house, a big one.
Yeah. No, the Lights auction, like a Lights auction, has got some Canons in it this year. There's a couple of them that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I know there's some nice ones there. I'm not bidding at all.
They have a black 6T there with a black 51.2 lens on it.
1.2 lens, yeah.
That's a
I've
rare
recorded
beast.
that now. Yeah, nice stuff.
That's probably worth pointing out. One of the wild, crazy things that Canon collectors like to do is figure out if a Canon. There's a lot of black cameras. Black, it was the often premium paint job, and they tend to go for a lot more. So, of course, there are a lot of cameras that became black later in their life.
That craze is getting bigger too. I am seeing a lot more cameras that are turning out black. It's like, I didn't know they made that camera black, and they didn't. People are getting more creative with painting cameras black now.
Oh, they're not stopping with black. They're going, I've seen Safari green.
Yeah. Well, so we can talk about that too. I'll go on record. There are no OD green Canon rangefinders that came from the factory.
Yeah.
Anyone you see, and people will claim there, and they'll have special stenciling on them and everything. There was no such thing. There's an OD green F1. Those are real, but there is not an OD green Canon rangefinder. That is a repaint job.
Or blue, or pink, or gray.
Yeah. Now, if you disclose that a camera is repainted, that's cool. I have a Hammertone repainted Model P, and it's cool. You just got to tell us that's what it is.
I collect Mamiya Secors, and I paint the base plates. So I'm
going to paint a camera black someday. I'm going to paint one of my own black someday. What the collectors do is first of all, we know the telltales. There are some things you can see.
Right.
You can look at whether the strap lugs are the right color, whether the self timer's got the right features on it and then usually if it's black with really white stenciling, it's been repainted because that 50-year-old paint, it turns yellow.
Yes, that's exactly what I look for too. Does it look too perfect? If every piece that's white, the name or the shutter speed numbers, the little engravings, if it's pure white, it's a repaint. It's incredibly unlikely for there to have been a legit original black enamel camera from 70 years ago that is aged so perfectly that everything is still white. And I mean, it could happen. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it exists. It's just incredibly unlikely.
The other thing that happens naturally is brassing, right? So here's
Yes.
my 7 that's a original black 7, and the bottom shows the brassing the most, and mine's got some dings and everything else, but it's got brassing. But I have seen now cameras with fake brassing. They painted it in.
They relic them like they do guitars.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say they're just like relic guitars.
Yeah. Mike, did you have one of the green F1 Canons from Kurt?
No.
I know folks that collect those. If we ever do a Canon SLR episode, I know who to talk to.
I got one from Rudy. It was actually not a factory paint. It was done by a department store in Japan who contracted to have them painted green and actually made boxes for him that were non-Canon boxes.
So it's not a factory original, but it's a an era, contemporary original.
Yeah, I mean, they bought them new. They was sold during the time, but they had just contracted for them.
And see, I don't necessarily like some people get really angry when people start painting cameras yellow and pink and purple and stuff like that. Like that, whatever. Like if you do you. But the problem is that in order to paint a camera the proper way, strip it down to the bare brass, take all the parts off, that's a lot of work. What a lot of people end up doing is they just paint over the chrome. And if you do that, it's gonna look great the day you do it. But the second you even handle that camera, that black paint will just chip off the chrome. Like your fingernail can scrape it off. That's how fragile that coating is. If it's not bonded or cured to the actual metal, and there's the original chrome is in between the brass and whatever paint you've put on it, it's going to come off very quickly. It's going to look like crap. And any amount of money that you might have paid or to get a pink Hello Kitty Leica, it's just going to look like absolute crap very fast.
I think if you've got photographic evidence of all the black models, then you can actually prove your point, I think.
Yeah.
Variations.
So what Peter was talking about, you recorded that 6T that's on the lights auction. Peter and a few of the other collectors that are very good at documenting these things have been recording the serial numbers because, of course, the black cameras were made in batches, right? They didn't just make one black camera at a time.
Yeah, they made them in batches.
They would take several of the body parts and have them. They would not chrome them necessarily. Some of them, I think, some of the Model Ps were chromed and then they were treated and painted. But then later on they were raw brass. But the 6s and there are black 6s. I think are there black 5s? There are black 6s and then there are black 7s.
V2s. There are some V2s.
Those are original, but they were done over the raw brass. But we record the serial numbers because you can figure out the batches from that, and you can pretty quickly tell just based on the serial number whether a black camera is real or a repaint, or say original. It's obviously a real camera, or is it a repaint or an original?
There are some 4SBs that are actually 4SB or 4SB2. I'm not too sure which one it is. That are black, and they were done by the factory.
Oh, really? I thought those were okay. I'd like to learn more about those because I know I've seen some that were aftermarket because there were also some Canon cameras that there were shops that did them in the day where they would paint them black.
No, there was. I know of 2. They're both in the States.
I'm very interested to learn about those. There's somebody recently sold a repainted, and it was disclosed as repainted black 4SB with a lens, and they had I think laser etched the all of the engraving so it was exposed brass, and then they clear coated it. It was beautiful, and I was like, someday I've got to make one of those because it was a gorgeous
I got
camera.
here a repainted black 5T.
All right, but that one is a repaint.
It's not factory.
Can I see the self timer a little more closely?
Yeah, it's not raised. It still has a dot in it, but it's kind of an inset.
That's interesting because I think the black, their chrome ones won't have the dot.
No, the chrome ones don't have the dot. Yeah, and also it's got the black strap lugs.
Here's a chrome 5T. Notice that it does not have a divot on the self timer. And when you see a repaint, you'll see it does not have a divot on the self timer.
The one you got, Ira, it looks like a genuine. Give me the serial number and I'll tell you.
542618. Is that correct?
It looks like a genuine one, mate.
I think that's real.
Really?
That's real.
Yeah. But see the divot on the white dot on the self timer.
What about the shutter release? Is that black?
Everything's black.
Yeah, it's a genuine one, I'd say.
Huh.
So on the 7s, the shutter release is chrome on the black 7s, but this varies by the model.
Yeah.
So on the 5T, I think it is all black. But yeah, if that so I have seen people fake the self timer divot. They'll go in and drill a divot and paint it white, but it's usually not in the right place or it's the wrong size or whatever else. You kind of visually see it's different.
We need to start winding things down. We still have quite a few people here, so I wanted to kind of give the opportunity for anyone who's had a question for any of us, Greg, Peter, any of us about Canon Rangefinders, fixed lens, whatever. Here's your opportunity.
I did have a question. I'm new to rangefinders. I've not shot a lot of them. You guys have been talking about the different variations of the magnified rangefinders, the adjustable rangefinders, that kind of thing. Like, what are the benefits to each? Are the magnifications? Is that the idea to compensate for like the different focal lengths, the frame lines? Like, I've heard a lot of it going around tonight. I just wanted to. I was just curious.
Yeah, the one that came out with a 2B was like a three-way little lever adjustment.
Okay.
And that's what put Canon on the map. And it's even Leica didn't have it. So, but that's just, you can have it with telephoto. It goes 50, 85, I don't think it's 100 and 135 mil.
Yeah, the intent was to change the it's not just magnifying the rangefinder, it's magnifying the entire combined image. So if you've ever used any rangefinder camera, like an original Leica, an Argus C3, any camera where the viewfinder and rangefinder are separate, to people who are new, they sometimes see that as a con. Like, well, I don't want to have to move my eye from one window to another. I prefer when the two are superimposed on top of each other, because clearly that's the way that the industry eventually went. However, if you really pay attention, the nice thing about when you have a separate rangefinder and separate viewfinder window is that the magnification ratios are different. If you hold a Leica 3, for example, in front of your face, and you look through the different windows, one of them, the rangefinder one, is going to be much larger. And that is helpful for two reasons. People like me with terrible vision, by magnifying the rangefinder, you can see it better. Like, you can make out finer details a little bit more, but also it's better for telephoto lenses, right? Like, depth of field, nailing accurate focus on a longer lens is much more critical than it is at 50 millimeter or even with a wide angle lens. So by being able to adjust the magnification of the rangefinder, if you're shooting with a 50 millimeter lens, but you have bad eyes like I do, it actually makes the rangefinder easier to use. That's why earlier in the episode I had mentioned I like putting a 50 millimeter auxiliary viewfinder and then just cranking up the Canon to the maximum size that it can do. And I get a highly magnified rangefinder image that allows me to focus very precise on things far away. And then when I want to compose, I just move my eye a quarter of an inch to the other window.
Nice.
If you've never used a camera that has a separate viewfinder and separate rangefinder, if you approach it rather than saying, oh, I got to move my eye, it's slowing me down, but you're gaining a more accurate, in my opinion, easier to use rangefinder, to me, that's the pro of it. I actually like using again, a Leica 3, I'm just using it as an example, but where the images are separate, because I like that accuracy. I don't care that I have to move my eye. In fact, think about it. How many 50s and 60s Yashicas, Mimiyas, Ricos, whatever, where the beam splitter has started to fade? Even the Nikon rangefinders are famous for having difficult to see rangefinder patches sometimes. And people are putting tinted window tint in front of the main window to darken the main window so that they can see the rangefinder patch better. You don't need to worry about that when you have a separate window. And that's, to me, the biggest benefit to it.
Well, there's two things I'll mention on that. One is what you mentioned, one of the weaknesses of the Leica design, where they use a silvered mirror that's still exposed to the atmosphere. That silver can oxidize over the years and you lose that reflection and your rangefinder gets dim. The Canon design, starting even with the 2B, they used a prism,
right.
Back-to-back prisms. So the silvering was in an oxygen-free space in between the two pieces of glass. And unless you had balsam separation, which can occur, it doesn't get exposed to the atmosphere and it stays bright. And decades later, they still stay bright. Again, unless you get one that has separation. But the other thing I'll note is on that, so the lever, and that's actually what I like about the Canon Barnax, actually over the backloaders, is that lever you can, and what I tend to do, since it's right here under my left finger, is I'll flip it which way it is. I'll flip it back, which is the magnified view, and I'll do my focusing, and then I'll flip it forward. So you can do that with it up at your eye. You can just reach up and do that and flip it, and now I can compose without taking it down from my eye. So I like that design quite a lot.
It's definitely something you have to try, and then once you see it, it's like, this is actually pretty cool.
My best score was this, which I think is a 3A at the thrift store one time, and it's like almost like it's never been used. So I love the idea of the auxiliary viewfinder with it because, yeah, it's super tiny to look through, especially with glasses. So does it have to be a Canon?
No.
50mm, or could it be?
You can get one of the cheap TD Artisan ones on eBay. I'm lucky enough. I have what is this? SBOO, SBOO. I forget what they're called. I've used that. I've used anything. I mean, really, anytime you're using any kind of clip-on viewfinder, it's never going to be perfectly accurate. Even a genuine Canon isn't going to be perfect, but it's good enough to compose your image, especially at 50mm.
They did a couple of things interestingly. So you can get, of course, parallax adjusting, and all the manufacturers, Canon and everybody else, has ones that were manually parallax adjusting. And then I guess it's worth mentioning on the 5 and the 6s, they had the automatic adjusting, where they have that little BB in the accessory shoe, and you get viewfinders that actually automatically adjust with the rangefinder for parallax. Which I don't know how many manufacturers did that. And they only did it on the 5 and the 6. They got rid of it by the P, and the 7 they didn't have that feature.
Greg, I thought that was a hot shoe.
No,
there's a pin that
it's a cold shoe, and there's a little BB you can see.
Yeah, I saw the
there.
BB. I thought that was a hot shoe.
No, that is if you put a lens on it, or you sit there and just open it up and poke on the rangefinder, you'll feel that moving. And if you get one of the usually the black viewfinder accessory viewfinders that does not have a lever on it, you usually see a similar little dimple on the bottom of that. That's the automatic parallax adjusting type, and they pair with the 5 and the 6 cameras. And you can also, if you have one of those and you have a non-automatic camera, there's actually a little adapter, rangefinder coupler or viewfinder coupler that they sell that turns that automatic one into a manual one. So they sold all kinds of accessories for it.
Good question. Any other questions?
I am considering getting a 50mm collapsing lens. And I was wondering if anybody has experience with the Canon 50mm f3.5 collapsible. And I'm also considering the Konica Hexar 50mm f3.5 as well. So has anybody had any experience with these lenses?
Most of the 53.5s are all going to be basically an Elmar clone, a Tessar design. They're very optically similar. As long as you get one that's got good coatings, you're probably going to get very similar performance on them. I'd say the thing you got to be careful about is there's always some controversy about whether the Japanese versus, say, the Russian, not the Soviet lenses, whether they're adjusted correctly for the rangefinder. And there's some controversy about that. But I would say just because there are so many of them, the Canon ones might be a good bet just because they're less expensive. The Leica Elmars tend to go, because of the Leica name, they tend to go for more. There are lots of them, so you might find a good deal on one. Probably as many of those made as anything out there. And then the others are rarer.
Yeah, that's the Kanushi Roku ones are optically great, but you're going to pay more because they're rare.
Yeah.
They're hard to find.
They're beautiful lenses.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And if I could say one more thing, I photograph horses out in the field with the little Canon rangefinder. And this little, so incredibly cute sports finder is one of the nicest sports finders I've ever used.
Yeah, or the universal finder, they also call it. Yeah, they're very cool. There's a Leica version and a Canon. There's a Seiki version of that, and then a few Canon versions. Yeah, I don't have a Seiki one. If anybody sees one, let me know.
I've got a couple.
I'll bet you do.
I've got a fun little story that I think all of you would really appreciate. I've got this 4S2 that I picked up a couple years ago, online estate sale kind of deal. And what was more interesting about it to me was it had all of the original documentation with it, or a lot of original documentation with it. And I posted on the Canon historical page on Facebook. But one of the things that was in there is this statement of understanding from provisions of Article 8610 for ship regulations for the USS Wasp.
Oh, cool.
And so I know who the camera belonged to. got his rank. We got the date that he had to sign this for saying what he could or could not photograph. I will say it's fun to think about how old a lot of these cameras are, but on top of that, just a couple days ago, this guy's granddaughter just sent me a message because she saw that posting on the Facebook group, and she was doing research on a grandfather from the wartime and was really appreciative to see the information and get that.
Please, if you ever encounter that kind of stuff, preserve it, because that's
Yeah.
somebody's story. And
That's
I
hard.
love I have a couple of S2s where I could trace them back to the person who bought them in Japan while they were serving there. And to hear their story and just what kind of a person they were and how their life turned out. There's even one that he's got an interview on YouTube when he was 103. He passed away in 2025 at 105.
Yeah, this gentleman's wife is still alive right now at 101.
Yeah, and
Wow.
it's history. These are people's lives, and I try to make sure I have a digital versions of that and make sure to keep it with my records so that whenever I pass these on, I can pass that story on.
There's some interesting stories with cameras.
Well, I wanted to thank Peter for coming back on. It's been 4 years since we had a chance to talk to you. I'm pleased to have met you, Greg, and you've become a regular member of the community, the Discord. You've been on several shows, but Canon Rangefinders are clearly a big interest for you. So happy to have you here. We had a lot of cool people that have popped in and out and been able to share their stories. Joan, it was great to see you again. Jeremy, everyone else, Ben, who spoke up. A few people haven't had a chance to talk, which is okay. We are going to go back to 3 weeks for our next recording, which will be, if we stick to that, of course, because, things can change. That'll be Monday, June 8th at our regular time. And somebody just today I think it was you, Greg, pointed out that it's going to be episode 110. So is there enough Instamatic conversation to fill a whole show? I have my doubts, but you never know.
There is other 110 cameras, the Rollies and the Voigtlanders and a whole bunch of other Minoltas and so on.
If you consider expanding it to all the 16 millimeter cameras and stuff, I think you've got quite a lot to talk about there.
Yeah. So we don't know. As always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are influenced by you guys. So we may have just inadvertently decided what the next show is going to be about. Maybe we'll end up talking about TLRs again. Who really knows? But I wanted to thank everyone for coming on the show. It's great to see you guys all here. Everyone have a good rest of your night and rest of your week. And we'll see you guys next time.
Good night,
everyone.
Good night, everyone. Have a wonderful week.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
In the waiting room is someone named Martin Olson and Marty O. What do you think that's the same person?
Who was Marty O?
I don't know. He didn't speak. I called him early on.
Huh.
I don't know. There was one other person.
He didn't go on mute either, so I couldn't figure out if he wanted to speak and just didn't.
Yeah. Bob Bronaloni was in there for about 10 minutes. He didn't say anything. Sherlock was in there for like 2. And then he dropped out. So I don't know if they guys were just wanted to see what we were doing or not.
Have we become like a halfway house
Yeah, I think so.
for lost photography collectors?